Have you ever heard about a relationship between a teacher and a student that turned into a horror story? In this video, we tell the terrifying story of a talented, powerful professor and a dreamy student whose relationship goes too far and ends in tragedy gory. At the center of this tragic tale were two individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Ciara Bailey, a 34-year-old English professor at Briarcliff Community College, was known for her brilliant mind and captivating lectures. Kane Barker, a struggling freshman with dreams of becoming a writer, was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. What began as mentorship slowly twisted into a web of manipulation, desire, and ultimately murder. As investigators peeled back the layers of their relationship, they uncovered a dark tale of exploitation, obsession, twisted fantasies, and deadly desperation. Let's explore every detail of this case, from seductive promises to cruel plans, and understand how a seemingly harmless relationship can turn into your worst nightmare. Don't take your eyes off the screen, because this story will make you unable to stop thinking about the thin line between passion and madness. Ciara Bailey's journey to Briarcliff was paved with academic accolades and personal turmoil. Born to wealthy parents in Boston, Ciara showed early signs of exceptional intelligence. Her father, a stern investment banker, and her mother, a socialite with a penchant for cocktails, provided Ciara with every material advantage but little emotional support. From a young age, Ciara learned to use her intellect as a shield, burying herself in books to escape the cold reality of her home life. She excelled in school, skipping 2 grades and entering Harvard. It was there that Ciara discovered her passion for English literature and her talent for captivating an audience. After completing her PhD at Yale, Ciara seemed destined for a prestigious position at an Ivy League institution. However, a scandal involving an affair with her married thesis advisor derailed those plans. The academic community's whispered judgments and thinly veiled rejection drove Ciara to seek refuge in the small town of Briarcliff. At Briarcliff Community College, Ciara quickly established herself as a rising star. Her lectures on Renaissance literature and modern poetry drew students from other departments, and her innovative teaching methods earned her the admiration of both colleagues and students. Dr. Bailey was the epitome of success, brilliant, beautiful, and dedicated to her craft. But beneath the polished exterior lay a woman haunted by her past and driven by an insatiable need for validation. Ciara's relationships were often intense but short-lived, leaving her feeling empty and misunderstood. She craved the adoration of her students, basking in their admiration and subtly encouraging their dependence on her guidance. A psychological evaluation conducted after her arrest would later reveal a complex personality disorder characterized by narcissistic traits and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. It was this dangerous cocktail of intelligence, charisma, and unresolved emotional issues that set the stage for her fateful encounter with Kane Barker. In him, Ciara saw not just another student to mold, but a chance to reclaim the youth and passion she felt slipping away. Kane Barker's path to Briarcliff Community College was far from typical. Born in a working-class neighborhood, Kane was the youngest of 4 children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father, a construction worker, spent long hours on job sites, while his mother juggled multiple part-time jobs to keep food on the table. From an early age, Kane found solace in the world of books. While his siblings excelled in sports and practical skills, Kane was the dreamer of the family. He would often be found scribbling stories in tattered notebooks or lost in the pages of worn paperbacks borrowed from the local library. Kane's high school years were marked by academic inconsistency. Brilliant in subjects that captured his imagination, like English and history, he struggled with the rigid structures of math and science. Despite his potential, Kane's grades were mediocre, and his SAT scores fell short of his aspirations. The rejection letters from his dream colleges were a bitter pill to swallow. But beneath Kane's artistic temperament lay a young man grappling with self-doubt and a desperate need for validation. As the fall semester began, Kane could never have imagined that his pursuit of literary greatness would lead him down a dark path of ethical compromises, emotional entanglement, and ultimately to the shores of Lake Briarcliff, where his young life would be cut tragically short. The first day of advanced composition class was a turning point in both Ciara and Kane's lives, though neither could have predicted the tragic course their paths would take. Ciara, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, commanded the room with her presence. Her eyes scanned the sea of fresh faces, pausing momentarily on Kane, hunched in the back row, nervously fiddling with his pen. As Ciara launched into her introductory lecture on the power of narrative, Kane found himself captivated. Over the next few weeks, Kane became a fixture in Ciara's office hours. What began as discussions about assignments gradually evolved into deep conversations about literature, life, and Kane's aspirations. Ciara, recognizing Kane's raw talent and vulnerability, began to subtly shape their interactions. She would lean in closely when reviewing his work, her perfume lingering in the air. Her feedback was a careful mix of praise and criticism designed to keep Kane constantly seeking her approval. She shared personal anecdotes, creating an illusion of intimacy that blurred the lines of the student-teacher relationship. Kane's classmate Amelia later told investigators, "We all noticed how Dr. Bailey treated Kane differently. At first, we were just jealous of the attention, but looking back, there was something off about it." As midterms approached, Kane was struggling in his other classes. The pressure to maintain his scholarship weighed heavily on him. Sensing his distress, Ciara made her first overt move. After a particularly long office meeting, she placed her hand on Kane's arm and spoke softly. "I see so much potential in you, Kane. I'd hate to see it go to waste because of a few difficult classes. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement to ensure your success." Kane, naive and desperate to prove himself, failed to recognize the dangerous territory he was entering. He interpreted Ciara's offer as a lifeline, a chance to focus on his true passion without the fear of losing his scholarship. As autumn painted the Briarcliff campus in shades of gold and red, Ciara and Kane's relationship intensified. She invited him to exclusive literary events, introducing him to her colleagues as a promising protégé. Kane, intoxicated by this new world of intellectual stimulation and perceived belonging, began to rely on Ciara for more than just academic guidance. Ciara, for her part, revelled in Kane's dependence. She carefully crafted every interaction to deepen his emotional attachment while maintaining plausible deniability. To her colleagues, she was merely nurturing a gifted student. To Kane, she became the center of his world. By the time the fall semester was coming to a close, the boundary between mentor and student had become irrevocably blurred. Kane's writing, once filled with diverse influences, now mimicked Ciara's style and preferences. His social circle had shrunk, with more and more of his time devoted to extra study sessions with Dr. Bailey. Neither Kane nor Ciara fully realized the dangerous web they were weaving. As the winter break approached, their relationship teetered on the brink of a precipice, ready to plunge into depths from which there would be no return. The winter break marked a critical turning point in Ciara and Kane's relationship. With the campus largely deserted, they found themselves drawn into a vortex of intensifying emotions and crossed boundaries. Ciara, under the guise of providing additional mentorship, invited Kane to her off-campus apartment to discuss his final paper for her class. The evening began innocently enough, with Ciara serving tea and engaging Kane in a heated debate about postmodern literature. But as the hours wore on and inhibitions lowered, the atmosphere shifted. Ciara, her voice lowered to a near whisper, began to share personal stories of her own struggles as a young academic. She portrayed herself as a misunderstood genius, persecuted by jealous colleagues and bound by the rigid structures of academia. Kane, already in awe of Ciara's intellect, found himself drawn deeper into her world. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who truly understood the artist's struggle. When Ciara's hand brushed against his, the electric charge between them was undeniable. What happened next would be a point of contention in the later investigation. Ciara claimed that Kane initiated the kiss, overcome by youthful passion. Kane, in his final statement, insisted that Ciara had orchestrated the entire evening to this end. Regardless of who made the first move, that night marked the beginning of a physical relationship that would have devastating consequences. As the new semester began, Ciara and Kane's secret affair intensified. Clandestine meetings in her office turned into long weekends at secluded bed and breakfasts. Ciara showered Kane with gifts, rare books, expensive pens, a laptop to replace his outdated model. She framed each gift as an investment in his future as a writer, further binding him to her. Kane's grades, which had been middling in his other classes, suddenly skyrocketed. Ciara used her influence to intervene on his behalf with other professors, painting him as a misunderstood genius who simply needed the right guidance. She promised Kane that with her help he could secure a spot in a prestigious MFA program, bypassing the usual requirements. But as Kane's dependence on Ciara grew, so did his anxiety. The initial thrill of their forbidden romance began to give way to guilt and fear of discovery. His writing, once vibrant and unique, became a pale imitation of Ciara's style. His few remaining friends noticed his increasing isolation and erratic behavior. Ciara, sensing Kane's unease, doubled down on her manipulation. She alternated between lavish praise and cruel criticism, keeping Kane in a constant state of emotional turmoil. She convinced him that their relationship was special, a meeting of twin souls that the ordinary world could never understand. In a particularly chilling move, Ciara began to insinuate that Kane's success was entirely dependent on her goodwill. During one tense encounter in her office, she casually remarked, "It would be a shame if the ethics board were to investigate the sudden improvement in your grades. They might get the wrong idea about how you've been earning them." The implied threat was clear. Kane, trapped between his ambition and his growing sense of moral unease, began to withdraw into himself. His journal entries from this period, later recovered by investigators, paint a picture of a young man in deep emotional distress. February 15th. I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I've achieved feels tainted. But how can something so wrong feel so necessary? March 3rd. E says she's the only one who truly understands me. Maybe she's right. The thought of losing her terrifies me more than anything. As spring bloomed on the Briarcliff campus, the web of lies and manipulation had grown so thick that Kane could scarcely remember his life before Ciara. His family, worried by his increasingly infrequent calls home, planned a surprise visit. Ciara, paranoid about discovery, forced Kane to rebuff them, causing a painful rift. It was during this time that Kane began to confide in his roommate Rowan. While he didn't reveal the full extent of his relationship with Ciara, he shared enough for Rowan to become deeply concerned. Rowan's worried glances and pointed questions about Kane's relationship with Dr. Bailey would later prove to be the thread that would begin to unravel the whole sordid affair. As the semester neared its end, the pressure on both Ciara and Kane intensified. Their relationship, built on a foundation of manipulation and false promises, was beginning to crack under the weight of its own contradictions. Neither could have predicted the violent culmination that lay just around the corner, a tragic end to a romance that should never have begun. The catalyst for the tragic events that followed came in the form of a seemingly innocuous email. Mrs. Helga Atkinson, the Dean of Liberal Arts, reached out to Ciara about Kane's remarkable academic turnaround, expressing interest in featuring him in a college newsletter. For Ciara, this well-intentioned inquiry set off alarm bells. The thought of increased scrutiny on Kane's achievements filled her with panic. In a frenzy, Ciara called Kane to her office after hours. The tension was palpable as she paced the room, outlining the danger they were in. Kane, already worn down by months of emotional manipulation, felt the last vestiges of his self-worth crumbling. It was in this charged atmosphere that Kane finally found the courage to confront the reality of their situation. His voice barely above a whisper, he said, "This isn't right, Ciara. What we're doing is destroying me." Ciara's reaction was swift and cruel. Her nurturing facade cracked, revealing the ruthless manipulator beneath. She reminded Kane of all she had done for him, how his success was entirely due to her influence. In a chilling moment, she asked, "Do you really think you'd be anything without me? You're nothing but a small-town boy with delusions of grandeur. I made you." Kane, his eyes open to the toxic nature of their relationship, felt a surge of anger and self-preservation. He shot back, "This ends now. I'm going to tell the Dean everything." The colour drained from Ciara's face. Her carefully constructed world teetered on the brink of collapse. In a last-ditch effort to maintain control, she alternated between threats and pleas, reminding Kane of the consequences they would both face if the truth came to light. But something had shifted in Kane. The fog of infatuation and manipulation had lifted, revealing the stark reality of his situation. He turned to leave, his hand on the doorknob, when Ciara's voice, now ice-cold, stopped him. "If you walk out that door, I'll make sure you never write again." Kane paused, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, without turning back, he walked out, leaving Ciara alone with the ruins of her twisted fantasy. The following days were a blur for both Kane and Ciara. Kane, emboldened by his decision, confided the full extent of the affair to his roommate Rowan. Together, they decided to approach Dean Atkinson with the truth. Ciara, meanwhile, spiraled into panic. She alternated between desperate attempts to contact Kane and frantic efforts to cover her tracks. She deleted emails, shredded documents, and called in favors from colleagues to vouch for her character. As Kane prepared to meet with the Dean, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Ciara's threats echoed in his mind, but he was determined to reclaim his life and his integrity. Little did he know that Ciara, driven to the brink by the imminent exposure of her crimes, was formulating a desperate and deadly plan to silence him forever. On the night of the murder, Kane Barker left the library just after midnight, his mind preoccupied with the meeting he had scheduled with Dean Atkinson the following morning. As he walked along the deserted path that skirted the lake, he failed to notice the figure emerging from the shadows behind him. Ciara Bailey had spent the day in a state of frenzied planning. Her rational mind had been overwhelmed by a toxic mix of fear, rage, and desperation. In her distorted reality, silencing Kane had become the only way to preserve the life she had built. She had waited for hours, watching the library entrance, a large rock clutched in her trembling hands. As Kane approached a secluded bend in the path, Ciara made her move. The first blow caught Kane by surprise, sending him stumbling forward. He turned, shock and betrayal etched on his face as he recognized his attacker. "Ciara, I trusted you," he gasped. But Ciara was beyond reason. With a strength born of desperation, with a rock in her hand, she struck again and again. While he was on the ground, Kane's attempts to defend himself were weakened by his reluctance to hurt the woman he had once admired and loved. In the aftermath of her violent act, Ciara stood frozen, the reality of what she had done crashing over her. The fog seemed to close in, muffling the sound of Kane's body as it slid down the embankment into the dark waters of the lake. With mechanical efficiency, Ciara began to cover her tracks. She gathered Kane's scattered belongings, wiping them clean of fingerprints before tossing them into the water. She scoured the area for any evidence that might link her to the scene. As the first light of dawn began to break through the mist, Ciara made her way back to her apartment, her clothes sodden and muddied. Over the next few days, Ciara attempted to maintain a facade of normalcy. She taught her classes, attended faculty meetings, all while battling the internal chaos of her guilt and fear. When Kane was reported missing, she feigned concern, even joining search parties organized by the college. But the weight of her actions took its toll. Colleagues noted her distracted demeanor and uncharacteristic nervousness. A psychology professor who had known Ciara for years later recalled, "There was a wildness in her eyes, a tension in her movements. It was as if she was constantly on the verge of flight." Ciara's carefully constructed alibi began to unravel almost immediately. The rock she had used as a weapon, hastily discarded in a dumpster behind her apartment building, was discovered by a maintenance worker. Security camera footage placed her car near the lake on the night of Kane's disappearance, contradicting her claim of being home all night. As the investigation intensified, Ciara's paranoia reached new heights. She became convinced that everyone knew her secret. In a moment of panic, she attempted to flee, hastily packing a bag and withdrawing large sums of cash from her bank account. It was this erratic behavior that ultimately led to her undoing. Kane's body, weighed down by rocks, was discovered by a group of students on a weekend fishing trip. The grim discovery sent shockwaves through the Briarcliff community and marked the beginning of the end for Ciara Bailey. The discovery of Kane Barker's body transformed the missing person case into a full-blown homicide investigation. Detective Cole Jenner, a veteran of the Briarcliff Police Department, took charge of the case. Her first steps were to secure the crime scene and order a comprehensive forensic analysis of the area surrounding Lake Briarcliff. The autopsy revealed that Kane had died from blunt force trauma to the head, with drowning as a secondary cause of death. The medical examiner noted defensive wounds on Kane's arms, indicating he had tried to protect himself from his attacker. As news of the murder spread, the campus of Briarcliff Community College became a hotbed of speculation and fear. Students whispered in hallways, casting suspicious glances at their peers and professors. The administration, desperate to control the narrative, held conferences assuring parents and the community that this was an isolated incident. Detective Jenner and her team began the painstaking process of interviewing Kane's friends, family, and associates. It was during these initial interviews that Kane's roommate, Rowan Lawson, provided the first crucial lead. Rowan revealed Kane's troubled relationship with Professor Bailey, including vague references to an arrangement that had left Cain increasingly distressed in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. This information led investigators to take a closer look at Ciara Bailey. On the surface, she appeared to be a grieving mentor, distraught over the loss of a promising student. However, as detectives dug deeper, inconsistencies in her story began to emerge. A breakthrough came when forensic analysts discovered traces of soil on the rock used to attack Cain that matched samples from Ciara's garden. Additionally, security footage from a gas station near Lake Briarcliff showed Ciara's car in the area on the night of the murder, contradicting her alibi. As the evidence mounted, Ciara's colleagues began to come forward with their own observations. A professor from the psychology department recalled a disturbing conversation with Ciara just days before Cain's disappearance. She seemed agitated, he told investigators. She kept talking about how she couldn't let everything she'd worked for be destroyed by a misunderstanding. The investigation took another turn when detectives uncovered a series of emails between Ciara and Cain. While carefully worded, the subtext of these messages hinted at an inappropriate relationship. IT. Specialists recovered deleted drafts of emails from Ciara's college account that were far more explicit, detailing her manipulation of Cain and her fears of exposure. The search of Ciara's apartment yielded damning evidence. Hidden in a locked drawer, detectives found Cain's journal, which detailed the evolution of their relationship and his growing desire to end it. With the wealth of physical evidence and witness testimony, the district attorney's office felt confident in charging Ciara Bailey with first-degree murder. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community, shattering the image of the brilliant, dedicated professor and exposing the dark underbelly of power dynamics in academia. As Ciara was led away in handcuffs, the true scope of her deception began to unravel, leaving the Briarcliff community to grapple with the question of how such a predator had hidden in plain sight for so long. Over the next several hours, Ciara's full confession emerged, painting a disturbing picture of manipulation, abuse of power, and ultimately murder. She spoke of her initial attraction to Cain's talent and vulnerability, how easy it had been to shape him to her will. Her voice filled with bitterness as she recounted Cain's decision to expose their relationship, describing it as a betrayal that left her no option but to silence him permanently. The trial of Ciara Bailey was brief but intense. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, from forensic analysis to Ciara's own confession, despite a vigorous defense attempting to paint her as a victim of her own mental illness. The jury took only 6 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts. The judge, her voice heavy with the weight of the moment, sentenced Ciara to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case of Ciara Bailey and Cain Barker brings many profound lessons about ethics and abuse of power in the teacher-student relationship. First, it emphasizes the importance of maintaining clear and professional boundaries in the relationship between faculty and students. Trust and power must be used responsibly, avoiding any abuse or ethical violations. Warns of serious consequences when power is abused. Ciara manipulated and controlled Cain, leading to a toxic relationship and ultimately Cain's tragic death. This reminds everyone that abuse of power not only harms the person being abused, but can also lead to unpredictable consequences for both parties. Follow our channel to discover dramatic and mysterious true cases. Join us to investigate, analyze, and find out the truth behind each story. Register now to not miss the most interesting content. Thanks for watching.